Welcome, everyone. I'm Councilmember Zach Hall, and I'm calling the March 4th, 2025 City Council Planning, Development, and Environment Committee to order at 6:31 p.m. I'm joined by Council President Walsh and Councilmember Jang. Thanks for being here. Quickly running through the agenda, we have public comment, approval of minutes, and then COM 0117 2025 proposed docket of comp plan amendments. So the first item on our agenda is public comment. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There's a general public comment opportunity now at the beginning of the meeting, or you can wait to make your comments after the presentation and council question and answer period of each agenda item. Those who signed up in advance will be called on first to speak. If you're joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, press *3, or if you're on a computer or smartphone, look for the hand icon. This varies by device, but one option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. And if you're in the room and didn't sign up, I'll be sure to ask for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. So we'll just wait a moment now to see if anyone is online as well, but not at this moment. Okay, great. Would you like to make public comments now? Yes? Okay, perfect. Well, I will just say you've heard our guidelines for public comments many times, so I'm not anticipating any disruptive behavior or anything, so we're just going to skip our guidelines for now, and feel free to come on up, and you got 5 minutes.
Connie Marsh, live on Squawk. And in the middle of the night, I started thinking trees, because there is a bit of code that is coming through on parking that talks about being able to remove trees that you would otherwise have to retain if they're showing that you can't build and I've been listening to too many things, they say if it's infeasible. And so I'm trying to figure out, I went to the Commerce information, and they seem to talk about landmark trees. Significant trees. Now, we have landmark trees, and we, in theory, are going to have heritage trees. And so I'm trying to connect the whole urban forest management plan with potential code language to try to understand what it is we can protect in our town, because I'm pretty sure we don't want our heritage trees and landmark trees to fall to this, but I am unsure of the interpretation of those trees in this code. And so far, I haven't heard that we're having a conversation about that. And so we have interlapping departments and language that are going to cover that. So I would ask you to cast a fir tree eyeball on that particular topic, if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing. I'm not seeing anyone else in the room. Anyone online, clerk? Okay. Well, in that case, just a reminder that written comments are always welcome, and you can email us anytime at Issaquah or citycouncil@issaquah.gov. The next item of our agenda is approval of the January 8th, 2025 meeting minutes, which were distributed in advance. Any corrections by the committee? All right, hearing none, the January 8th, 2025 meeting minutes are approved as presented. Then the next item on our agenda is what we're all here for, COM 0117, the 2025 proposed docket of comprehensive plan amendments presented by Assistant Planning Director Stephen Padua. Take it away, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair Hall, and good evening, council members. Tonight I'm going to talk about the 2025 docket of proposed comprehensive plan amendments. Tonight we are looking for direction on 2 questions. Are there amendments presented on the docket that are not relevant or necessary, or are there any refinements that need to be made to the amendments that are presented tonight? Before I dive into the docket list, I want to give a little background information on the docket process. So the docket process is actually a state-required process for any comprehensive plan amendments, where we present a list of potential amendments going into the comprehensive plan prior to actually pursuing those amendments. This docket list that's presented to you has criteria embedded in code to help with the decision-making process. The first set of criteria is if you meet any of the 3 criteria that's listed, then it is allowed to be on the docket list. And the second set of criteria is the amendment must meet all of that criteria. And I'll, instead of reading verbatim what the criteria is, I'll talk through that as I go through the docket list. Oh, Kristen. Kristen, if you don't mind muting your microphone. Thinking we have a ghost in the room. The Planning Policy Commission reviewed the docket on January 9th and then held a public hearing on January 23rd. Diving into the docket list, the first item on the docket list is related to meeting the requirements for House Bill 1110 and House Bill 1337, which is part of the Middle Housing Project. And that is a potential name change to the single-family zones to accurately describe what the allowed uses are in single-family zones. As part of the project for middle housing, we are now required by the state to allow middle housing types in single-family zones, so the zone change would accurately reflect that change. Because this is meeting a state requirement, it complies with that first set of docket criteria, consistent with 18-104-060A1B. The second item on the docket list, that is the update to policies in the comprehensive plan to allow co-living housing, and this is to comply with House Bill 1998. That is to allow co-living housing in our development regulations, which is something that's being proposed as part of policy amendments for this year. This is consistent with meeting a state requirement, so it's consistent with the first set of docket criteria. The third item on the docket list is kind of 2 parts, and it's an update to the land use designation map. The first part is the redesignation and rezone of the food and clothing bank site. This is consistent with the first set of docket criteria that's being part of a rezone request. The second part of this is the change and removal of the community facilities zoning and land use designation. This is actually to address an issue that we've come upon just in the last few years as part of surplusing city properties. In order to surplus city properties, we actually have to rezone each of them. And so that can actually delay any surplusing of city properties, which can have a major effect on whatever the market is for the property in the sale. This is not consistent with the first set of policies, but is consistent with the second set of policies, that being that staff do not believe that changing or removing the city zoning, staff believe the change and removal of the community facility zoning increases the efficiency of land management, that being able to streamline and simplify the surplusing property process. Staff do not believe that this raises any policy or land use issues. The amendment supports continually changing conditions, that being the need to surplus city properties over time. That way we're not delaying surplusing city properties process. And lastly, this does not conflict with any goals or policies identified at the local, county, or state level. The fourth item on the docket list is an update to the transportation element to update policies related to concurrency. The ongoing project to update concurrency is actually to comply with House Bill 1881, which is the same requirement that required the environmental element into the comprehensive plan and addressing climate change. As part of that bill, it required cities look at multimodal level of service, which is part of our concurrency. And so that project is to comply with that bill, that being it is consistent with the first set of docket criteria. For reference, we're providing a map of the food and clothing bank site. The existing land use is community facilities, and we are proposing to change it to retail, which is the most prominent land use surrounding the property site. For reference, we're providing a site for all the community facilities around the city that city staff will be providing an evaluation for as part of that effort. And then as part of the amendment process for each of those items in the docket, they'll be as part of the individual projects, that being the middle housing project, update to concurrency, looking at the co-living policies to check to make sure we're consistent with state requirements to allow co-living housing, and then also looking at the community facilities sites for potential changes. We plan to return to the council committee in the third quarter with the full list after all the discussions have been had with boards, commissions, and with city council committees, and then with potential adoption of the amendments by the end of the year. For next steps, the docket will go to city council for tentative adoption on March 17th. That concludes my presentation, so I bring it back to direction needed.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Yeah, go ahead.
So I did ask this question on email, but wanted to ask this again so that this was on the record. So with the community facility zoning, could you speak a bit more of, how common is it to have this community facilities zoning, and what have, other cities with that type of zoning done, and have they changed it to, getting rid of the community facility zoning?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So city staff have done an evaluation of other zoning in other cities in our region, and no other city has a community facilities zoning designated. The intent of developing the community facilities zone was to meet a state requirement, which is all planning cities have to identify city-owned properties, and creating that zone was Issaquah's method to identify those city-owned properties.
Any other questions?
And then now that we don't have that, or we're proposing not having that zoning anymore, is that going to change anything of our process to identify city-owned properties?
No, so the city-owned properties would maintain being city-owned properties. The development regulations as they apply now would still be maintained. When we look at, if we were to, say, develop a site, one of the city-owned properties, we would look at the most prominent land use surrounding the site now, and those development regulations would apply. And so none of that is changing with this change. The only thing that's really changing is that requirement to update the comprehensive plan, delaying a surplus process.
So just to follow up on that, we have another list of all of the community facilities that we own. And so because we have that list, it isn't necessarily needed in zoning format,
That's
correct?
correct,
Okay.
yes.
Any other questions from committee? What's the urgency around the community facilities? Is there any particular problem we're trying to solve sooner rather than later? I think I understand it intellectually, what you're saying, but is there
It's-
urgency?
To answer that question, it's low urgency. I mean, we wanted to do this as part of the periodic update before adoption last year, but it just, staff didn't have the capacity to go through each of the facilities as part of the periodic update. So we wanted to do it as part of this comprehensive plan update following the periodic update. But we're hoping to make the process easier for any future need to surplus city properties. At this time, we don't know all the city-owned properties that would be surplus. Right now, I feel like that list is actually fairly minimal. But as we've learned in the last 2 years, that changes very quickly.
So as part of the process this year, staff will be working with PPC to go over all the different sites, their
Correct.
zone, community facilities. Give me a sense of how many we're talking there. How many sites are we reviewing?
Off the top of my head, I can't say the total number of facilities, but we'll be trying to minimize that list so that it's easier for the planning policy mission to process. Because there's a lot of properties like park-owned properties or park and open space that will probably just be clumped together in terms of how we might change the zoning for each of those.
And I guess the origin of my question there is we have a pretty lofty work plan already for planning staff this year and next year based on the kind of budget conversations that we had last year. So I'm just curious if we feel confident staff can review all these properties with Planning Policy Commission this year, that it's urgent enough to take up as much time and space as it needs.
Yes, the planning team has looked at the work plan for this year, and we believe we do have the capacity to be able to do it, which is why we looked at it closely as part of the periodic update, which is why we wanted to delay it to this year instead.
All right, any other, yeah, go ahead.
So I know at this point, we're looking to approve the docket so that the work can be done for the year. What would happen if, for example, as you went through this with PPC and there were just so many questions, or if the concurrency update doesn't happen for some reason, what happens to the comp plan amendments at that point? Can we remove something from the docket if there ends up being problems over that period of time?
Yes. Going through each of the amendment process as part of the individual projects, if the recommendation from the commission and staff after the discussions is that we not move forward on the amendment, then we can easily take it off the docket list. What we can't do is add it after the docket is approved.
Let me ask another one, and this probably would have been more fair to ask in advance and to have you chew on it, but the process as it exists right now is you have to, if something's zoned community facilities, it's going to have a different use. It has to essentially wait, right? It has to get on the docket. We have to make the amendment to the comp plan at the end of the year. Did we consider, and this is all kind of in the realm of public benefit, so I understand intellectually your argument around it could be a public benefit for the city and for users to have that be a simpler process and easier process. Did we consider how it might be a public benefit, a tool actually to slow it down, have community involved in the process, and was there any intent around the fact that we had it community facilities and then the fact that it would have to change and wait a year before any zoning change could happen?
I'm going to try to respond to that question, and then I'll ask our principal planner, Kristen Leeson, who's our local historian on a lot of these things, chime in if I miss something. You know, the original intent of providing this zoning was really just for identifying city-owned properties. The process for surplusing properties goes through a planning process. That's something that's ongoing with our facility staff now, which is going through extensive conversations with city council and the public on what we should be doing with city properties before we pursue any surplusing. And so adding this year-long comp plan process is more of a technical redundancy more than actually adding a benefit for community conversation. Kristen, did you have anything to add?
Hi, Kristen Leeson, principal planner and apparently historian, which makes me feel very old. But no, I don't have anything to add what Stephen said, but I was thinking about the question that you asked earlier about how many parcels would have to be looked at. And really the intent is to look at the community facilities, not necessarily parks and open space, because those would fall into a different zoning. So really, it's my understanding. So really the ones that we're going to be looking at are those that are zoned CFF. And as far as the one you just asked, I think Stephen's answer addressed it. Thank you.
Well, and then, thank you very much. And then, so then just to clarify, the other designations for capital facilities, what exactly would be happening with the review of these sites? Or
Well, excuse me. So right now, community facilities, open space, those are open space properties that are going to remain open space. And granted, we haven't looked at every detail yet, but they would probably, what most cities do is they have a zone called parks and open space. And those would fall under a new parks and open space zone and land use designation. The community facilities are just the ones that we would have to look at more clearly in more detail.
okay, thank you. I'm following. Appreciate that. Any other questions from committee? All right. In that case, we do have an opportunity for public comment again. Would you like to, do we have anyone in line first? No? Would you like to make any more comments? Come on up.
Okay, my name is Connie Marsh, and the community facilities actually was put into place in 1983. So it was not part of the process that Stephen was talking about. This was earlier on. I found the council meeting minutes, which are fairly skimpy, but it was an effort to try to corral the community facilities in a way that people could understand that they were community properties and needed to be treated separately, right? And then initially in our code language, we have a ton of language that discusses community facilities, and that is community facilities, open space, all this stuff, right? But what our code says is that there is a public benefit, because these are rare commodities, to add extra protection and a layer for these properties to be sure that we are intentional about it. Now I'm interpreting. I did send you all the language so you could see the exact language that I was talking about. Hopefully you clicked through. And then I also wanted to discuss, because this is about the docket, right? We don't really want to be getting into the nitty-gritty of the whole thing. I just wanted to correct a little bit of information. So what the section must meet all of the following criteria, and it says the amendment represents a matter appropriately addressed through the comprehensive plan, and the proposed amendment demonstrates a public benefit and enhances the public health, safety, and welfare of the city. So I don't think it meets the criteria to go on the docket, because I don't think that there has been a public benefit evidenced that has been held up against the public benefit of having this layer. And until that conversation is had, and there's a convincing argument that this is somehow more of a public benefit than the public benefit that we already state that having the layer is, we aren't there. And it doesn't meet the criteria of going on the docket. I think, okay, have the conversation. Now, the school district is community facilities, right? So you would also be removing the community facilities development language for community facilities, because we actually have development standards for community facilities. And so that is not a community benefit to me to strip out the hard word earned language that we use to try to create this urban schools sort of a conversation, and how we should treat community facilities as a different entity than because they're public items. Also, you have community facilities in the middle of parks, because parks have places where they have open space on one side and maybe their community facilities recreation on the other side, but they have community facilities in their parks because they want to build a bathroom. And you can't do some of these other things in parks. You want a community center. Okay, it's a park, but it's a community facility. And so I think this is a broad brush to try to solve a problem that could be solved a different way. And more so, I don't think that they have shown that it has a public benefit to do this, especially when put up against the public benefits that are in our code for creating and keeping community facilities as a separate entity. You all have all that, and I have given you all that before, but the conversation doesn't seem to have changed very much, which is a little disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Appreciate the comments. So we will now go, will you throw up the slide on feedback? We'll now go into committee feedback. Anyone want to start us off on any feedback they have for the administration? Go ahead, Council President.
Thank you. So first of all, this is generally something that we do every year, usually pretty straightforward. So I want to thank you for following the process and doing the work on that. These are a little bit different than some of the ones that I've seen in previous years. And so I think it's important to have a conversation about it. I appreciate the change to single-family zone names to recognize the state change there, as well as the other updates to comply with the state changes for co-housing and things like that. The transportation element, I think that's more of the substantive conversation about the concurrency, so I don't see a problem with that. And I also don't see a problem with the food and clothing bank, since that has gone through a process. Talking about the change to the community facilities land use designation, I think it does represent a public benefit for the ability to make the changes that are needed to facilities so that we don't have to continue to maintain something that isn't currently being used by public, and we're having to pay taxpayer dollars in order to maintain. And so I can recognize the public benefit of being able to make that change in the designated process that we've already talked about, which is the surplusing process. This concept of having to rezone it and wait a year has always seemed to me as punishing to taxpayers who are having to continue to pay for those properties, to city staff who want to be able to move on something where we've already gone to the agreement that this is something that we would like to do, to property owners. And so I am definitely in support of making that change. I will be very interested to see how the parks and open space compared to the facilities, how that is handled and how we make adjustments, because our community is very much in favor of our parks. And I think we'll be very interested to make sure that that process is still protective of our areas. And I'm sure that that will be a good conversation at PPC. And that's really my feedback. I'm generally in favor of all of these changes.
Thank you. Councilmember Jang?
Yeah, thank you for putting this together. And to piggyback off Council President Welsh's point about, community facilities, I think, the city owns a lot of facilities, and maintaining them is something that's, really difficult for us. And so kind of making it easier for us to get it in the hands of people who are using it for community benefit, like the food and clothing bank, I think, being able to make it so that that process is less onerous is a public benefit. I will also note, based on the audience members' comments, I looked into how schools are zoned in other areas, and they have a specific zoning called school. And so that could be somewhere where some of that language on, zoning for schools could live, and that would make more sense than kind of, lumping in schools with other community facilities like the garage or, because the city owns all sorts of stuff and we're even just starting to get a handle on what everything is. So I think it definitely makes sense to kind of, instead of glomming together everything that the city owns as one type of facility, be like, actually, there are different types of facilities that we own, and making it, more in accordance with everything else that's going on. So definitely supportive of that. And on the other ones related to, complying with state law, we got to do that. And so fully support. And yeah, that's it for me. Oh, and one other thing, I'm very interested to learn more about, as this concurrency conversation gets going, what some of the, level of service type of metrics are for transit and other modes of transportation.
Thank you. And I did just want to quickly, before I ask or share my comments, a quick questions. I think the public comment with regard to community facilities and schools was that it's tied to specific development standards. So is there like cleanup that would have to be done in terms to where things are tied to the term community facilities as well? And is that additional work that staff's taking on? Or?
Yes, as part of the evaluation going through each of them, we're going to be looking at if there's any potential code changes going to be necessary to support making the change.
All right, well, thank you. So for the first, for single-family zones, I agree. I think it makes sense for the nomenclature to more accurately capture what state changes have happened for single-family zones. Same with complying with requirements for co-housing, and it makes sense to include the the concurrency stuff since we'll be doing concurrency later this year. Also glad to see the food bank site they're very eager to continue serving the public on that site. I feel a little bit differently. I feel like we haven't met the bar for public benefit for all of community facilities designations. So I think I do understand the rationale from the user perspective, easier for the city during the surplusing process, easier for private properties. But I do think that making the case for public benefit is much clearer and easier when we're going property by property, right? City Hall Northwest, the food bank site. And that's certainly what staff, it seems like, intends to do with all the different properties. But to the point of our public comments, we have to be able to make that case in order for it to be on the docket in the first place. I actually think it might be worth having a broader policy conversation with council here to discuss before taking this on as part of the comp plan process, especially because there doesn't seem to be a major urgency around it, although I take your point about things come up, you don't always know. Where we could be asking ourselves kind of what is the value of community facilities first, right? It exists for many reasons and there are many different types. And there's this process of waiting. And I agree that it can be cumbersome in certain contexts, but itself could be a tool to ensure public benefit that I think in terms of process, council should weigh in on that first. It seems to me to be a significant policy question because there would be a significant impact to those kinds of things. So though I do think it's very reasonable to assume we go through that process with council and we do say it is a public benefit to remove that and come up with different terms for X, Y, and Z reasons. But I don't personally think that I can make that claim today in order to put it on the docket. So my ask would be that we remove this from the docket on the comp plan this year and have a kind of broader conversation with council. Maybe I'll just kick that back to the rest of the committee members, see if you have any thoughts, and we can go from there.
Yeah. So I think that was why I asked the question of what happens if we ultimately don't agree with what the change is, or we find through the process that it's problematic and we're not ready to make that change. I'm not ready to say no to this until we have that information. I'm not ready to say there's going to be a problem until it's presented with a problem. And I have, in reading over the criteria, I clearly see the public benefit that could be achieved by making that change. And the fact that, the comp plan is the right method of doing this. It isn't problematic with the rest of our comp plan and the goals of the city. It's something that all of the other cities around us do. And so from that perspective, I think this gives the public benefit that would be needed to achieve on the docket. I'm not saying I necessarily approve of the future policy, but I think it achieves the criteria needed to do that evaluation and be put into our comp plan.
Yeah, and as Stephen mentioned earlier, we can take this off the docket, but we can't put it on later. So especially since they have the bandwidth to work on it this year, I think we can, they can do the evaluation and then we can decide whether or not to actually move forward with the rezoning. But I think we need to see what the full evaluation is to make that decision.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. I am still, I think, falling on the side that we haven't clearly demonstrated public benefit, but it seems like a majority of the committee thinks so. I might ask if it's okay, maybe we put this on regular business and highlight the question for council, if that's okay with the committee. Any objections to doing that? Any objections from staff to doing that? Okay. Any other comments that we'd like to share with staff? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, as we're highlighting this information back to council, just making sure that we're very clear that this is approving the docket, not the policy, because while comp plan stuff very regularly comes to PDE, it doesn't necessarily come to the full council as often, and so they are probably not as familiar with the idea of creating a docket, it going through the work, and then doing the approval. So that would just be my ask.
And can you remind me when this comes back to council? Is it the 17th?
It'll be March 17th.
Okay, so the same day I would make my report, so that won't be useful in that. Okay, got it. Then, yeah, that process sounds good, that council president has just described. Do you have everything you need on this particular item?
I do.
Great. That was our only bit of so-called regular business for committee. So the next item is announcements. I did want to go quickly, or go to Director Dollywall, who's going to give us a quick overview of the committee's work for the year, but any announcements by the committee first? Go ahead.
Just a question, do we need to vote on that at all, or is it just providing direction?
Good question. Do we need a vote?
I documented the majority and minority opinion.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. I'll make sure to add that to my notes, so I ask that question in future. Thank you for your patience, everyone. It's my first time chairing this committee. So Director Dollywall, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. So wanted to kind of give you a little preview of what's coming your way this year. So middle housing, if you haven't heard that yet, will be fair and square in front of you. We hope to get that through Planning and Policy Commission in March, and so April 1st, our plan is to bring that forward, Planning Policy Commission's recommendation for your consideration. Following that, there's a lot of bills that got passed on the parking piece, so we'll be working through that and hope to bring that to your committee in May. And it'll be bundled together with some Title 18 annual updates at the May meeting. And then June, if we are done with all our boards and commissions looking at the tree code updates, that'll come in front of you in June. Of course, the docket, once it's approved, we'll be working with the commissions on that. So that'll be the third, fourth quarter work. Some of the other things that are in play are Puget Sound Regional Council is going to go through a process of redesignating our growth centers throughout the region. So there'll be some recertification efforts, and we may involve a briefing to this committee on that topic. Light rail planning, thank you to council that provided the funding to take that on for the next couple of years. We'll be working with other council committees on that, and we'll see if it makes sense to go directly to full council, because I think there was more interest for all the entire committee. So if you just go to mobility and infrastructure, then and PD is also interested, and so I think the plan there is to go to full council on that topic. I think those are the main ones that'll, that we're going to be bringing forth this year. And of course, things can change. Boards and commissions may decide to take a little bit longer here or there, but that's the plan for now.
Thank you very much for the look ahead. Any other announcements? Yeah, Council President. Oh.
Just, I know we did the big Title 18 adoption, and one of the parts of that was to look at it annually and try and understand. So I know PPC has been going through some clarifying amendments. Are there any policy amendments that we're looking at, particularly as people have started to experience the code, any problems that they've worked with? What is the plan there?
Yeah, so I think this year we bundled everything together last year, the clarifying and the policy ended up having 6 different ordinances. So in order to solve that issue, getting all the clarifying amendments in one ordinance, so that's on a path, more straightforward one. The policy amendments are, we plan to go to Planning and Policy Commission soon on those. And they have tackled a few things, for instance, we took out the beehive regulations, or we took out the animals and rooster conversation from the code. So there's a little bit of policy debate on those kind of things. So that's that. We haven't started the conversation with PPC, I believe. Kristen, do you know when, is that upcoming? PPC for the policy amendments for Title 18?
The policy amendments, so Planning Policy Commission has actually been reviewing a lot of policy amendments since last fall, kind of taking it piece by piece. They'll look at it all together with a lot of their feedback incorporated, I believe, in April, and then it'll come back to council committee following, once they have a public hearing on that, and then we'll go to city council for potential adoption in June.
Great. No announcements? All right. Well, then our next meeting is scheduled for April 1st. Oh, April 1st. Hopefully that's not an April Fool's joke. And the preliminary agenda is COM 0103 Middle Housing Draft Regulations and COM 0104 2025 Title 18 Clarifying Amendments. There being no further business, we are adjourned at 7:11 p.m.